Welcome to Facing the Moment, brought to you by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. In these episodes, we will address various crises and focus on how to navigate them with abundant fortitude and a bit of hope. As we discuss relevant observations together, we will identify meaningful actions that will generate valuable insights. You can download all episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
I'd like to welcome my listeners first to this episode, in which we'll focus on anger and its impact. Most importantly, we're going to explore how we may be able to move from impulsive reaction to thoughtful reflection and response when we are caught in its jaws. Anger appears to be everywhere around us, and social media and news programs, in our town halls and on university campuses, and in our workplace and household. It is even often palpable within our own mind and body. We have been told growing up to fear it, avoid it, control it, suppress it, or manage it. Might it hold clues we need to uncover? What is anger? What is it telling us? What do we do about it? How might we follow its signal or guidance without turning it into undesirable or hurtful behaviors that we might regret? How could we wise up to it? Our interest here is to look at anger from both the micro perspective, that is me, the individual, and the macro perspective, us, the culture, our political environment, the larger society. And to help me think through these questions and notions, I'm pleased and honored to be joined by Ted Riskin, LCSW. Ted, welcome.
Thanks, Tufik.
Ted Riskin is a therapist fully trained in internal family systems therapy, IFS, and many other modalities. He hosted a workshop on speaking from anger years ago that caught my attention. Ted has been practicing for 3 decades and has supported individuals, numerous therapists among them, groups, and families. A mathematician by training, he integrates analytical skills from his data processing days with a mindful, body-centered, and spiritual approach, in which, and I'm quoting from his website, he is not interested in fixing anyone because he does not believe there's anything inherently wrong with any of us. That has developed many a program and retreat that he strives to make deeply meaningful and enjoyable. In fact, he has even designed a physical gathering space to help him achieve that. And as he says it, he wants each of us to become the best player we can be in the game of life before us. Ted, welcome again. What else would you like to add about you, which would be relevant to our conversation today?
Just a couple of things I'm excited about now. One is the space you mentioned. We're doing group ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which has been really lovely and very much consistent with the IFS approach. And then the other thing is that I facilitate ecstatic dance for Astral Movement Collective. And also, if I could start with a caveat, because I guess we're going to be talking about anger, angry parts, and one of the things that I really like about IFS is that there's very little dogma. And, Dick postulates some, what he calls the laws of inner physics.
When you say Dick, that's the founder, Dick Schwartz.
Schwartz, yes. And so these might be, everyone has a self, self can't be damaged. And by self, we're meaning a place within us that comes from calm and compassion and clarity and perspective and a bunch of other words that begin with C and P. And
in English, right? Because there are, these words are
yes,
do not start with CNP in other languages. Yes.
I wonder, sometimes you can translate a song and still make it rhyme. I wonder if you can translate these words and still make them all have the same letters. But so it's very simple. And like another law of inner physics is that there's no part that self can't handle. And by part, we mean whatever's not self, like my anger, my critic, my shame, my terror, my striving, my parts that want to be nice. Those are all parts. Any feeling or anything with an agenda. And some of them hold difficult feelings, and that we're afraid that self can't handle, that will be overwhelmed. But one of the laws of inner physics is that if other parts aren't interfering, self won't be overwhelmed. But there's very little of that, as opposed to other models that use parts. Like there's one I know that it's like they give you a plastic thing, kind of like playing Twister, and you put it on the floor, and then and there's like 7 parts or something, and then you stand in one of them, and that's it. So those parts are named for you. So being a curious person, one of the C words of self, just leaves it open. And it's fine, because if you want to know what a part is up to, you can just ask. And if other parts are interfering, parts will tell us what they're up to. So that being said, I've poked around in my system for a long time, and a lot of people have given me the privilege of exploring their systems with them, and there's certain patterns or tendencies. So I just, the caveat is anything, like if I say an angry part does blah, 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 that really should be prefaced with, sometimes it looks like angry parts do blah, blah, blah.
Right, right. So these, thank you. Out of the gate, you already gave us a rundown on what IFS is, and this is not just an IFS-based conversation, but this is a model that, the foundation focuses its work on, and clearly it's one of your, leading models that you use. It's a framework, really. And I'm not big on the term laws, because laws can be broken and have been broken. And laws makes it firm and final and so on, even though laws can evolve over time. I like to think of the word model, a view of things, a lens through which we look at ourselves. And I'm a physicist myself, so we use that term, commonly, right? But to me, I want to remind the listeners that this is a model. It works for many people experientially, so it becomes the lens of how we look at things. And you're suggesting you might look at anger from that vantage point, and I appreciate that. So let's start by using your language, Ted, about the game of life. What do you think are our goals as individuals when we play this game?
Well, I don't know what your goal is, but I would like to more and more be led from what we call self. And I don't believe self has goals or an agenda. But my parts do. My parts have all kinds of agendas and things they want or think they need. And so I find that from a place of self, I want them to have that. And it feels to me like it's like if you had, a couple of 6-year-old, 8-year-old kids and went to Disney World, you might not be that into it, but taking them there is going to be fun. Like vicariously, you're going to be happy that they're having a good time. So I feel like self, without having an agenda, does enjoy taking care of parts and maximizing them getting what they want.
Okay, I hear you. I feel I want to, push you to explain that a bit more for our listeners who might not be familiar, because you're using the third person pronoun. Self is and self does, as if self is not a core of Ted Riskin or Tawfiq Hakim or some other person. So what I'm hearing you say is we have access to this core of wisdom that we carry. You called it indestructible earlier, undamaged. It's almost like the human spirit that we carry. And it has certain capabilities and qualities and maybe the promise of certain powers that if we are able to access those qualities, we might show up differently, and it might allow us to heal and deal with these aspects of us that you're referring to as parts. I'm assuming that's really what you mean when you say self is and self does. It's like saying when I'm in touch with that core of me, when I'm able to separate from the situation at hand and not be triggered or activated, I'm able to respond differently. I don't want to go into detail, but this is, I'm assuming, what you're describing.
Yeah, to your point, it'd be better for me to say, I want to give my parts what they want.
Right. Yeah. I
And I want
like
to
that
match them.
language better. Yeah. Because the way I look at it, I treat the various elements of me as me's. And, you know, when I'm whole, when I'm integrated, so to speak, I use the letter I. So all the me's attached to the I. And when they all work together, I feel whole. But in
Yeah.
any case, again, this is a model of how we look at the human psyche. I don't want listeners to worry about, oh my God, we're multiple, because the fact is we might be multiple, but it's not in the same fashion that people worry about multiple personalities and so on and so forth, in the sense that it could be a disorder.
We're clearly multiple. Most of us, all of our various parts know of each other, and if one part is up to something, the other parts aren't pushed out. But when there's been extreme trauma, it can happen that way, and that's difficult. But clearly, to ask me, what do I want? In a way, it's like asking your family, what kind of ice cream do you want? It's a silly question in a way, because the family doesn't want any kind of ice cream. Each person wants a different kind of ice cream. If you had to define what the family wants, it would be the aggregate of all the people. But that's how I feel. So if you ask me what I want, I'm going to ask all my parts, well, what do you all want? And then add up that all up, and that'll be what I want.
Okay. I hope this will become clearer for listeners as we go back and focus on anger. But thank you for this initial framework, Ted. Clearly, like you said, there are individuals in the family, and then there's the family, right? There is a certain personality, cultural norms, if you wish, that the family eventually adopts. So we have to keep track of this dynamic, the individual and the collective. Somehow they have to work together. So back to the game of life, right? Because in a game, there are winners and there are losers. And are we all not trying to get along and help each other out and move forward together? So I'm curious, as you, and I know you didn't use that expression lightly. It's not just a metaphor. You're thinking about it really as a game of life that we all play. But if we all play this game of life from our vantage point, are there rules so that we can actually not step on each other's toes all the time as we play that game?
Well, first, I don't like playing when it matters a game with winners and losers. And I think there are games that you can play where there's not winners and losers. But are there rules? I don't think there's any inherent rules. I think we all make up our rules.
Okay, so let's say at the front end then that ideally, aspirationally, the game of life is one where everybody is lifted up, right? Everybody it feels whole. Ideally, right? It doesn't work that way because there's this zero sum game that, if I win, you lose, and using this language of win lose or lose win or win win, kind of create this sense of competition, right? And maybe part of where we are today and why anger is what it is because I feel that you're winning and I'm losing. So maybe talk to me about anger from that vantage point, because I want to go back to the main subject of this episode. How do we wise up to anger? So we need to understand anger. We need to know where it's coming from. We need to figure out how to navigate it when it shows up.
Yeah. Well, let me pick up on what you just said before that, because I think it'll help. There's parts of me that are happy to see other people happy. And one of the qualities that we attribute to self is connectedness. And when I'm connected, it's hard for me to be happy when other people aren't happy. But I have other parts that are purely about my needs. And I'd say angry parts or anger is really a force in that realm to help promote or advocate for my needs, or depends on what level you're at, right? So you could have an anger for a group or a family or a country even. You might say when a country goes to war, that country is being angry.
Or that government.
That government, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay. So an angry experience, right? An experience of anger, an emotion, a sensation, some bodily activation that we call anger, you're saying happens when my needs aren't met. Is that what you're saying?
I would say in that case, more specifically, it seems to me that anger gets triggered when a boundary is violated
A
or threatened.
personal boundary
Yeah, or a
or
country's boundary.
a government, yes.
Yeah, but mostly when we talk about anger, we're talking about me, like a person. So when my boundary is threatened or crossed, it seems to me that anger, A, is an alarm for that, and B, it's an energy that pushes out to reinforce the boundary. And that might not seem like what anger is because, as you said, we have such a weird conversation about anger in this culture, at least. I'm not sure about other cultures, I think. Um, there's been such polarization between anger and parts that think you shouldn't be angry or that are scared of anger. And so anger has a bad name. But I would like to reclaim the word to just mean anger is a force that well, it warns me of a possible boundary violation, and it gives me the power, the energy to push out and reinforce the boundary and do my best to protect it.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear. Give me more specifics. Give me a couple examples of a boundary violation. I know that word is often used in, especially in certain relationships, to protect the individual's privacy and dignity and all that stuff. But maybe you can give us some specific examples of a
Sure.
boundary violation and how that boundary violation triggers something that activates this anger.
I mean, the simplest one, someone wants to take something from me without my consent. So the boundary is violated by something being taken over the boundary, but a boundary can be violated by something being put over the boundary, like if someone drops their garbage on my lawn. And it can be not physical stuff. So someone can steal credit from me, or someone can put blame on me. Someone can cross my boundary and start telling me what's happening in my system as if they have a better vantage point than I do. I think all of these are boundary violations.
Can you take us to what happens inside the body, inside, you don't have to give us a lesson in neuroscience, but wondering if you can just explain to us what actually happens when I experience that anger, when that boundary violation happens and I'm not expecting it, or it it affects me in ways I feel uncomfortable with, right? Uneasy with. What actually happens? What is that feeling? Where is it coming from?
Well, there's a lot of levels that you could describe there, and I'm glad you're not asking me to say the neuroscience because I couldn't. Most people describe it as a feeling, often in their chest or solar plexus. It's often like a hot feeling, but could be cold. It's a movement of energy, and it's like a movement outwards. That's typically what people would say. I like the IFS model, so I would just say that anger, when a boundary is crossed or looks like it's crossed, my angry part is gonna alert me and then be ready for action.
Okay. Okay. It's often said that anger is an expression of grief, shame, discomfort, things that we cannot withstand, right? And maybe the same boundary violations causes grief in some people because they're grieving the fact that they had a relationship with that neighbor or with that cousin or with that spouse, and look what they're doing. Maybe shame because maybe they blame themselves for having caused it. And these angry impulses can also be a cover-up for something deeper, right? Because if I just feel it's anger and I don't pursue where anger is coming from, maybe I'm missing, like you said, an alarm signal, right? When the smoke alarm goes off, you know exactly what's happening. There's smoke somewhere that you have to address. Well, tell us more, if you can, about the root causes. You mentioned boundary violation. I'm looking to fill the gap between the boundary violation and the actual feeling of anger. Because I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, because the next question is going to be, the issue is not the anger, the issue is the behavior that it manifests often.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in what you just said. So one is the smoke alarm. We don't know what's going on until we check. So the smoke alarm isn't even designed to tell us if there's danger. The smoke alarm is designed to tell us that there might be danger and we have to check. So I find angry parts work the same way. For example, every time I get in a traffic jam, my angry part gets activated. It has never learned, like, traffic jams don't bother. It's like, these people are making me late. And then I just have to talk to it and thank it for doing its job and say there's no boundary violation here that needs to be addressed. Actually, there's nobody who's like messing with me here. So that's, I'm gonna start to lose track of the things.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, so the next thing was about, you're describing how anger can be a secondary emotion. That's sort of how we would talk about it. And yes, so in IFS, we talk about exiles and protectors. Exiles are just feelings. They're parts that hold these difficult feelings, usually from trauma. And the protectors are trying to protect the system. Because when we're little, the feelings of those exiles could be overwhelming. They could destabilize the system. So our protectors are just ready to do a kind of a burden job, which is, I got to make sure you don't feel that exile. So anger is a great one for that, right? So mostly men, but maybe everybody now, if someone cuts you off in traffic, it's rarely you're going to see a guy go, oh my God, that was scary. Or I feel so disrespected, almost humiliated. I was so powerless when you did that. They're just going to get mad because it's easier to feel that protector. The protector doesn't think it's okay to feel all those other more vulnerable feelings. So yes, anger can be a burden protector and not really doing anything functional. But in terms of how to use it, I think we want to examine the system. Just like you don't trust the smoke alarm to tell you whether it's toast on fire or your couch is on fire. I don't trust my angry part to tell me whether I should honk my horn at the guy in front of me or just let it go. I have to bring other faculties to bear there. A, I got to decide, is there a boundary violation? And B, I need to decide whether I'm going to fight it. And if I'm not going to fight it, then I'm going to move on to the next stage of the grieving process, which is grief. So that kind of all holds together with sort of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's view of the process of grieving. Once we give up on the fight, then we move into the grief.
And of course, that has to happen in a fraction of a second, because the natural thing to do, or the more common thing to do, is to, curse the person, or not just, toot your horn, but cut him off, right? So there's this maybe practice where we have to be thinking about these things so that over time we can really process this whole this series of steps that you shared, Ted, in a moment, right? I mean, often when I'm driving, and I learned to drive in a different country where, you drive offensively in some ways, and people have learned to deal with that. So uh, when I'm driving with my wife, she reminds me, maybe this person is rushing to the hospital because, his wife is going to be delivering, or, come up with excuses for people, and that sometimes is a helpful process, right? To say, okay, to kind of calm the anger down, and maybe to allow some compassion within me to rise to the surface. And that has the ability to calm my system down. But it's kind of interesting that you said earlier, you speak to your anger. I understand in the IFS language, this is very common. You treat each part almost like a sub-personality, and they're often stuck in time. So there's the 10-year-old Ted and the maybe 20-year-old Ted, and then you can identify them, and then you're able to engage with them in a conversation. How do we do that without making it sound a little strange?
Strange. Well, I mean, you said practice, and maybe it takes a little practice to just realize it works really well if I engage with these different aspects of me as their own little personalities. But also, just to say about practice in responding effectively with anger, I don't think it's practice so much about thinking about it. I think the best practice is feeling. And so I'm a core energetics practitioner, and we routinely hand people a tennis racket or a bat and have them hit this big piece of foam rubber. And it's just practice at feeling the energy of anger in my body and welcoming it. And when people do that, their parts that have taken on the job of keeping that anger pushed down get activated, and then we get to work with them. Eventually they go, oh, it's okay. Like, this person just totally expressed anger, and nobody stomped them, nobody exiled them. Like when I do it in a group, it's interesting because people do that, and then I'll ask them to look at the people in the group, and they're sort of expecting a bad reaction often, and usually everyone's clapping, like, yay, that was great. So I think that's the first step to practice, because otherwise, how are you going to sort out what to do when now you have this internal struggle between an angry part that wants to do something and other parts that are trying to keep it down? It gets very confusing.
So basically, anger is a good thing to have because it's a smoke alarm. We have to find out where the smoke comes from, and then deal with it in a way that doesn't maybe incite anger in another person with whom we're dealing, right? So that would be a manifestation of healthy anger that doesn't turn into offensive behavior, undesirable behavior. Because to me, that's the issue, is what I see. There's what I feel and how I navigate that, but there's also what I project, how that thing is transferred to a different kind of action or even decision. So I'd like to parse this a little bit and see what is the connection between the feeling of anger and the behavior from anger, and how do we kind of stop one from mushrooming into something completely undesirable?
Yeah. Some of these questions are a little complicated, and I don't think this one is. Uh, First of all, I wouldn't assume it's not okay to offend another person either. But I think what's always the case, and it's not just with angry parts, and I got to introduce a concept, IFS word, blend. And so, in other words, sometimes a part will inform us of something and let self stay in the driver's seat and make a decision. sometimes the part just takes over. And parts will do that if they're burdened. If it's a protector, the protector doesn't think we can handle an exile, it will jump in the driver's seat and do what it does. If you saw that movie Inside Out,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that scene is in my mind where the angry, like the anxious part goes, no, no, don't react that way. And the angry part kind of pushes it away, hits the anger button. So that part and that moment blended. So I would say, but it's not just angry parts, any part. If a part blends, I'm liable not to get a good result because
So let me stop you and explain for the listeners that blending simply means that feeling or that characteristic of this feeling has taken over. I'm as a system, as an individual system, I've been hijacked by this. So I'm now anger. I'm manifesting anger. And what we're saying is these are not desirable situations to be in.
yeah, I would say my angry part is calling the shots now,
Mm-hmm.
which I would call rage. But if I'm feeling the anger and I'm present, self is present in the body, and I'm like, "Rrr," but I'm not blended, I'm not hijacked by the anger, which I think is maybe a better word even. Um, you know, one of the P words for self is perspective. So perspective can include like, well, maybe that person is driving someone to the hospital. Like perspective, my angry part doesn't have that perspective. None of my parts have that perspective. And we have to go up to another level. And at that level, which we will call self, we can have the big perspective. And that's when we can decide what to do and have it be an effective response.
Okay. Okay. So the intention is to give these various aspects of us uh, a little bit of that perspective, so that the anger shows up, but then somehow this other advisor says it's okay. You know, there may be a reason he did that. I'm not in danger. You know, not any longer. Right. Of course, there are situations where I want that anger because I might be in a dangerous situation. And there may be a different way to respond. But before we go there, I want to go back to the root cause of anger. I mean, I'm thinking about the world today, especially about the United States. There's a lot of anger festering in our communities. And part of that anger, it seems to me, is coming from the fact that my own personal values or cultural values or religious values, deep beliefs, have been violated, right? My sense of righteousness or my sense of right and wrong maybe has been violated. What can you share about this? You know, how the anger from the individual has become possibly rage. I like the separation between anger as a feeling and rage as a behavior, maybe. I'm not putting words in your mouth. That's what I heard you say, and I like that distinction. Could you take me a little bit beyond the personal and just take me societally? Can I make this big jump? And let's start parsing out what anger, how anger is manifesting itself collectively in these what many people would call turbulent times.
Yeah. I think what I want to suggest is that there's two forces here, and one is anger, and one is what we might call the critic. It's like our parts that think in terms of right and wrong. Like you said, the rules, like they're not following the rules of life. And if I'm barely making ends meet and my government is going to pass a law that's going to deprive me of health care, I'm going to be angry because they're taking that away from me. But that's different from saying it's the wrong thing to do. And I want to suggest that this whole notion of right and wrong, like the rules of life, is all made up. And when we're under that fantasy or that spell, we're not that effective. Partly because if I think I'm right and you're wrong, I can't dialogue with you. I can't work with you. And rarely have I seen somebody get made wrong by someone else and then respond with, "Oh, thanks for pointing out that I'm wrong. Now I will be right." Like everyone just doubles down and it's an arms race. And this is sort of where we've ended up. There's a lot of people running around saying that the other people are wrong. And there's no, I think it's scary sometimes for people to entertain the notion that there's no right or wrong, because then it's like, it's going to be chaos. But I think we have, like, if you look at nature, like my cat doesn't think in terms of right or wrong. My cat thinks in terms of what she wants, doesn't want. Um, you ever see those Planet Earth TV shows on PBS? So here's a question: when they have like a leopard and the leopard stalking an antelope, who do you root for? And I think I have to answer.
Yes, of course.
What would you say?
Oh, you're asking me. I mean, I would root for the victim, for the prey. But I understand that the predator also is set up to to survive in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
So there's the system in nature to allow for that. But the thing is, your cat knows when it's really dangerous and when it's not, a bit better than we do, because we assume things sometimes are more dangerous than they are.
Yeah, she's pretty good at knowing whether the consequence is worth taking the risk.
Yes.
But there's no sense of I'm doing a bad or wrong thing.
Right, correct.
Just like the antelope and the leopard. But what I want to suggest is, if you're watching, because this happened to me, I was watching it and they were playing sad music, and then I was rooting for the leopard. So in other words, I think if the music is scary, you root for the antelope. But if the music is sad, you root for the leopard, because you don't want the leopard.
Here's the thing. I admit, with some embarrassment, I've watched movies where I rooted for the quote unquote bad guy, the bad actor, who was gonna do terrible things. So here I am watching an antelope and a leopard, and rooting for the for the antelope. But in that movie, maybe with the music, or maybe because here's the hero, or he's interesting, or whatever, I'm rooting for the bad guy. So it's fascinating how we kind of shift, perspective, or shift positions based on something that I cannot put my fingers on.
It's all made up. And I just watched because they were leaving Netflix, Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12. And like, they're like criminals, but we're rooting for them because they make sure to show you that the guys that are getting ripped off are like worse people, and they're charming criminals. So we root for them.
Yeah. So what you're saying is very profound, really, we're influenced by the person packaging the story, packaging the message, packaging the information, packaging the news release, whether it's the music or the character development or whatever. And we find ourselves in a world of social media and algorithms and manipulation of messages and videos and the like. And what we see and experience is clearly adding to our sense of anger and even rage, especially when we have no common factual gauge any longer, right? Because people say whatever they want to say, right, wrong, on purpose, inadvertently, and it just changes the rules of the game, going back to your beautiful expression. So how do we navigate that? How do we keep anger in check? How do we bring perspective to it? How do we tell it, right and wrong? And I do not know actually if they're not absolute to some extent, but at some point I feel there must be a line in the sand. And it's going to become an individual decision, a family decision, a company decision, a party decision, right? eventually a national decision. How do we navigate that? It's like I'm worried that we're going to end up with the conclusion that each for his own. There's no way to navigate all this. All we have to do is to survive.
I think one thing to do is to question the parts of us who think in terms of right and wrong, because that just leads to more polarization.
Say
It's
more,
much
please.
cleaner. Sorry?
Say more.
Because if I label you as wrong, you're wrong. Your policies are wrong. How do I talk to you? And it escalates, because when you tell me I'm wrong, I'm going to tell you that you're wrong. Right? I'm going to make my case.
Well, I'm okay with you telling me my policies are wrong. Just don't call me names. Don't judge me for having these perspectives. I'm allowed to have perspectives that you might not agree with. I'm okay for people to disagree with each other. The issue I have, which I think gives rise to anger and to all the root causes of anger, is when you violate my dignity. When you tell me, in other words, I have no value. Now, I should be bigger than that, and I should feel that I'm unaffected by that. That's not dangerous. Say whatever you want. But that might take a different level of I don't know, practice or evolution. I think that's the issue. You can tell me I'm wrong. Okay, I'll be curious. Well, could you tell me why I'm wrong? I'm curious how you think differently. But I think we're in a time when it's not about he's wrong, he's right. The motive, the approach, how people might be demeaning to each other. That is probably what's raising the temperature and making people angry than would like them to be.
So what I'm suggesting is that the problem inherently comes from the notion that there is a right and wrong, and that my way is the right way and your way is the wrong way.
Okay.
We all just see things differently. And like you said, with your wife, there's perspectives you just don't see. So there are things happening in this country that I want to fight against. I don't like it. But if I say it's wrong, I'm at the same level as the other person. We're stuck in a polarization.
Mm-hmm.
You know that so Einstein, it said this in different ways, different times, but after the atomic bomb was created, and he said you can't solve a problem on the same level on which it was created, with the same thinking that created the problem. So if I'm polarized with someone, if I think they're wrong and they think I'm wrong, then I'm at the same level. To solve the problem, we have to come up and transcend the polarization, come out of the right and wrong. And it's like, well, you want this and I want this, and I'm willing to fight for the way I want to see it. I'm willing to fight for more populist economic policies in our country because I prefer that. It makes me mad and sad that people are hurting and other people have more than they need. But if I make it wrong, if you say it's wrong, you're kind of arguing with reality because it just is. You lose power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you, and I buy into this, that we get stuck in our positions and we lose the ability to be curious about the other's perspective. We basically lose perspective because now it's my perspective, my way or the highway, right? And we see this in every setting. We've seen it in schools, we've seen it in corporations, we've seen it in political halls,
Couples,
right? Couples, yes,
all the time.
Even in our own head, sometimes there is this tension between this and that, and they might be completely opposite to one another, in a major contrast of sorts. So let's talk about this for a moment.
We know. Since we mentioned couple, can I just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, please.
Illustrate this well. Often couples come in for counseling and they think the other one's wrong. And that hurts. That is, in a way, damaging to the soul to be labeled wrong by someone that you love, that you're that close with. And it helps them, I think, to learn to welcome their anger, like we're talking about. Because if I say to you, I hate that you did that, and part of me wants to kill you right now, that might seem extreme, but it's clean and it's about me. But if I say you're doing it wrong, that's about you. It's not clean.
Right. So you're talking about language also, and that's very, very important here. That I should own what I'm experiencing inside of me rather
Well,
than judge you for whatever you're experiencing, because I have no idea, first of all, what you're experiencing. I have no idea what your journey is and how you got here. All I can own is my experience. So, what you're saying, and this is a beautiful takeaway, Ted, that in these situations, especially when we're facing each other, you're not seeing the driver that's cutting you off, but you might be seeing a spouse or a child or a teacher or a manager who's accusing you of something or who's being rude or difficult. Instead of saying you, I could say, well, I hear you, yet I disagree. I'm curious as to why you're saying that. And that takes a certain ability to calm the system down, to tell the anger somehow in a fraction of a moment, it's okay. I can handle it. I can stand firm and might be able to build a bridge here. Is that what you're
yeah.
saying? So that language is important.
Well, it's interesting because you've heard of NVC, nonviolent
Yes, of
communication.
course. Mm-hmm.
So my first exposure to NVC was someone beat me up with it. And so to me, and I'm not an expert on that approach, but it seems to me that that is how you naturally will talk once you've unblended from all your parts that believe in right and wrong. And so they're coming at it from the language, like, well, use
Right.
these words, don't say these things. I would rather find the parts of me that don't like something and go, that's wrong. They're doing it wrong. And disabuse them of that notion that such a thing even exists.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will naturally talk that way.
Yes, yes. We covered a little bit of NVC on an earlier episode on repairing broken dialogues. And Jan Wofford, who was my guest then, talked a little bit about NVC and the needs and the feelings and that sort of thing. And
Yeah,
the
that's
work
a
of
very
Marshall
cool.
Rosenberg is very important. Yet, like you said, it doesn't explain how you get to that place where it becomes natural.
Yeah. And the needs and the strategies is a cool part of it. And I think it's separate from the main thrust, the way I see it is, which is stop believing that you're right and that there's such a thing as right or wrong. Like, give up that religion that you believe in, that there's such a thing as right and wrong. Then nobody's wrong. You just don't like what they're doing.
Okay, but if what they're doing is hurting you directly, physically, economically, emotionally, affecting your family, your survival, would you still say that?
Yep.
So
Because
explain
I,
it from your vantage point. If
I
the
don't need to
situation
make
is
them,
unsafe.
I don't need to make them wrong to not like it and fight. So that's where my angry part is. Like, if I am not suppressing my anger and I can mobilize a big angry response, then I will use that to push back against someone who's hurting me. But I don't know if they're wrong any more than the leopard is wrong. And by the way, can I throw in a little thing that I think is helpful for couples?
Yes, please.
So I grew up, my dad used to say kids are second class citizens. That was sort of like one of the mottos of the family. And the message I got was that what I want doesn't matter. And if my anger is used to kind of advocate for what I want, but that doesn't matter, then why would I do that in a relationship? If I don't think my partner even cares what I want, then what am I going to do? I'm going to prove that I'm right. Because if I can prove that I'm right, I'll get the thing that I want. That's my strategy for getting my needs met, is proving I'm right. And when that's happening in a couple, sometimes all you have to do is, I'll ask the other person, like, do you care? Do you want your partner to get what they want? Is that important to you? And they'll be like, yes, I totally want you to be happy. I want you to have what you want. And sometimes the other person is like, really? And if they can digest that, they can start to let go of needing to be right. Because I can't be right without making you wrong. So yeah,
maybe.
I suggest giving it up.
And maybe right and wrong is not a 0 and a 1. Maybe it's more of a continuous range.
Yeah.
So that there are different ways of looking at the climate crisis. There are different ways of looking at immigration. There are different ways of looking at the conflicts that we see in our world: Israel, Palestine, India, Pakistan. You can go down the list. Ukraine, Russia. And I'm not saying that we will look the other way when someone is actually exhibiting a leopard behavior, even though in our world as human beings, I don't see leopards and antelopes. I don't want to see leopards and antelopes. I want to see human beings of the same level. So go ahead, tell me why you see antelopes and leopards in our society of human beings.
The people who are in power operate from their rules is, if I can do it, I'll do it. And if I have the power, I get to say what happens. And if I win the war, I get to write the history books. And that's the game they're playing. And if I go, well, that's wrong, I'm not going to be. It's sort of what people are complaining to the Democrats about, right? Like, you're like, well, that wasn't right what Mitch McConnell did, and like, well, he did it. So what are you going to do?
Okay.
Stop going, it was wrong. Just deal with it.
But you're missing something, or I'm missing something that I think is critical here. If I accept that they're leopards and they're going to behave like leopards, am I going to be running all the time like the antelope would and looking over my shoulder every minute because they made themselves a leopard? I'm automatically an antelope, and I refuse to be an antelope. And I refuse to see them as a leopard. And I do not want to be the leopard, nor do I want to be the antelope.
So you just threw me an easy pitch to make another point, advocating anger. So, when we're threatened, we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Right.
Most of us have had fight bred out of us. That means now we got to go to the other three options. We've lost something in our toolkit. So let's bring back at least the option. That doesn't mean we fight all the time. But if a leopard's coming at me, I want to be able to decide, am I going to flee or am I going to fight? Or am I going to fawn? You see,
there's a lot of fawning these days. Yes.
Yes, a lot of fawning.
Yes. But to do that, you already jumped in and used part of your prefrontal cortex, right? Because you didn't just follow instinctively what your amygdala tells you to do. You took a moment, you paused, you took a breath, you called in your, cognitive faculties, and you said, what do I do? Which is the right thing to do right now? Exactly. And maybe by doing that, I shifted how I would react. And often in society, in our own world, we're not trained to do that, right? We lead with our amygdala. And politicians all around are doing exactly that. And unfortunately, some people respond in kind, the same way.
Yes.
And we end up all being stuck, is what you're saying.
Yes. And, you can look at what's happening in the brain, but the level that IFS takes, I think, seems to me incredibly useful, which is to just say, my angry part is activated and it's starting to blend. And I need to unblend, but welcome it. And then when I'm not blended with it, I can make choices with perspective, with clarity, with wisdom. I can choose my battles.
That also assumes something, Ted, and maybe that's part of the, the leadership from that wise place that you called self, or the model called self. And the assumption is I can deal with whatever. I can face whatever adversity. I have what it takes, right? In some cases, I might not get there because in some cases, I might be injured or, God forbid, killed, right? But short of that extreme solution, or have somebody in my family, God forbid, injured or killed. But otherwise, I'm trusting that I have what it takes to face adversity of any kind.
Well,
so tell me about how do I get to that belief, to that point? And maybe that's part of the practice you're talking about, accessing the wisdom. But without that confidence, I cannot approach life the way you're suggesting.
I trust that I have what it takes to make good choices and act effectively. And that doesn't mean I'm going to win all my battles. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to get eaten by a leopard. But if I get eaten by a leopard, I'm going to have done my best to not get eaten by the leopard. And that I trust.
So that's the takeaway you're saying, that we have to build that trust in our ability to make the best choices we can make. It might not be the right choice, but the best choices we can make.
Yeah, but here's what the enemy is: polarization. And with anger, most of us are locked in polarization between our anger and the parts that think it's not okay. And so when parts are polarized and they're struggling, they get bigger. And right, because like if you suppress your anger and you push it down, then eventually people sometimes explode, right? So in order to be able to not be taken over by anger, I have to find the parts of me that judge it and fear it and help them see that it's okay for me to have my anger. And then I need to practice feeling it in my body and going, this feels good. This feels powerful. It's not a bad feeling at all. It's just bad when it's coming and my other parts are trying to push it away. And then I can welcome my anger without a blending. And then I look at the boundary. I see, is there really a boundary violation or is it just a traffic jam? And I decide which battles I want to fight, because not all battles are worth fighting.
And are we trying to fight battles in which we don't violate other people's boundaries? Because then we might trigger their anger and behaviors that might backfire.
If my goal is to protect my boundary, if the goal is using my angry part, like the energy of my anger, I will make my incursion across their boundary as minimal as possible.
Yes.
And because the more power I have, the more I can protect myself without hurting the other. But if I have to kill somebody to protect my family or myself, I wouldn't necessarily avoid that if that's what has to be done.
So help me and help our listeners figure out, besides this suggestion you made about me getting to resolve the polarization within between anger and the other extreme, the one that contrasts that feeling. Help me figure out how we resolve our conflict societally right now, when the two parties are stuck, when truth is under attack, when people worry that we're becoming a police state, a state full of leopards. Can you take your work and experience and your deep insights and help suggest some type of action we can do individually in our families, um, collectively, to start shifting, to get a little unstuck? Because we're not just stuck; we're stuck as we as we spiral downward, toward fire.
I have no idea what specifically people should do, but I'm pretty sure unblending from parts and coming from a place of self is going to make you more effective, whatever you're choosing to do. And I think there's two things, two ways to help that. One is to watch for the polarities and don't get trapped in a polarity. Don't be at one side of a polarity. And in order to do that, you need to give up the notion of right or wrong, because as soon as you made someone wrong, you're polarized with them. And once you can unblend from the right and wrong, and you can feel your anger, but you're not blended with it, then from a place of self, you have resources. You can strategize. You can choose which battles you want to fight. But there's another thing that I think is really important for all of us. So the day after the election, I had a little time and I just sat with my parts. And I found parts that felt bullied, that felt scared, that felt powerless, disempowered, um, grieving, worried about other people. Like, I found parts carrying a lot of really difficult feelings, and I could sense that these parts were in the past. And
You mean your past? Is that what you mean?
yeah. So in IFS, when there's trauma, we postulate that parts get stuck in these scenes of trauma because they weren't processed, and it's like they're living them all the time.
All over again. Yep.
Yeah. So I went back and just started being with my parts who were bullied in the past and who were powerless, and didn't argue with them, just kind of validated, like, yeah, that was where you are in the past. That's really rough. And um, I was able to say, I have resources now that we didn't have then. And I'm big, like I'm a grown up. I have things I can do. And that seemed to be really reassuring for them. And in a way, I unblended from those exiles. I welcomed them, but then I think a lot of activism is fueled by protectors who are protecting those powerless exiles, and then it's not as self-led as it could be. So I think we all have to welcome our vulnerability and the parts of us that are scared and hurt and sad by what's happening, but also know that some of what they're feeling is they're back in the past.
You use the term self-led, and I know the foundations carries that name in it, that expression, self-leadership. So this is when we're in a state where that wisdom is accessible. These qualities that allow me to be calm, that allow me to have perspective, that keep the system together and allow no system to take over, in a way, so we can live in some form of harmony in our inner world. So I'd like to in the last few minutes of this very engaging conversation, Ted, maybe invite you to share some personal experience where you felt, very angry, and the work you did around it, or if not you, an example you can give from one of your clients, so that the listener can really see a maybe step-by-step approach on how one can go from being in the jaws of anger to really getting released from it in ways that didn't suppress it. Because like you said, we suppress it, it's going to explode, but kind of put it in perspective and give it its appropriate place in our system.
Well, here's what pops up, and it's illustrating maybe one side of where a decision could go. I'll do it really briefly. So somebody cheated me in a real estate transaction, and lied and withheld money, and the lawyer was in on it, their lawyer. And I happened to have a photograph or some photographs that proved my point that they didn't know. And but in order to fight this battle, I would have to spend money. I would need to make effort. And a part of me was saying, it's not worth it. Just walk away. Like the amount of money you're talking about, and you might not win, it's not worth it. And my angry part's like, please, could we just fight this? And my other parts, that like the ones that said it's not worth it, was like, okay, well, if the angry part wants to fight, let's let it fight. And my angry part had a great time fighting that battle. But I wasn't compelled to. I could have walked away. And I think, the other side of it is kind of what you're saying. If somebody, I mean, this story stuck with me from I'm blanking on his name. Maybe we'd have to come back, but he's a spiritual teacher. But he told the story of somebody who's in the grocery store and they're late and they get in the line for 5 items or less, and there's one person ahead of them, and she has a baby, and this person, so she buys like the one thing, she gives the baby to the cashier, and now the cashier is holding the baby, and this guy's standing there like fuming, like, so his angry part is like ready to do something, and fortunately for him he doesn't. And then the woman leaves, and the cashier goes, hey, thanks for being patient. My husband was killed in the Gulf War recently, and I had to take this job, and that's my baby. So my mother-in-law brings my baby in to see me for like a few minutes a day, and that's my chance to be with my baby. He's like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't let my angry part blend.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the car situation with the perspective about this person's rushing to the hospital, right? There could always be an explanation that is calming, an explanation that would put our angry part into an embarrassed state. It's like, how could I have even been angry at this person? Right?
Where they're not wrong, yeah.
Where they're not wrong, right? Where what they did could be explained in a different way. So,
by the way, real quick, I know we're wrapping up, but even some of the like fascism, which my parts just hate, the idea, but on the level of, if we go like to the next level up of the holonic system of the country, some of these things actually are saying we need to sacrifice the individual members of this organism, like the country, for the good of the country. So I don't know that that's wrong. I don't like it. I don't like what China does and what Russia does to its citizens, but I don't know if it's wrong.
Yeah, well, you are challenging us to look at the situation within us, in our families, in our workplace, in our schools, companies, whatever it is, in our nation and world, from a different point of view. To just question, is right always right and is wrong always wrong? Right? And just the ability to ask, could I see something positive? Could I see something right in what appears to be wrong? So that I can become more interested, more intrigued, more willing to uncover what is not so obvious to me, what may not be visible superficially, right? Just this one takeaway, I think, is very powerful. There are instances where I might need to do something different. I might need to fight. You also remind us that at times it's good to think about what the amygdala is prepared to do before allowing the amygdala to do it. Maybe all that is what we call self-leadership, the ability to allow our human spirit to take over instead of our habits and lessons we learned in childhood. Because at the end of the day, like you said, we carry our children, our own, children with us, wherever we go. And we need to have the adult in the room to listen, to negotiate, to facilitate, so that anger could be a healthy smoke alarm, functioning smoke alarm. We want it. And what we need to do is to figure out how to translate it into decision, into actions that could be helpful to us and the people around us. I want to say that this was challenging in some ways, Ted, and invigorating in other ways. So I thank you so much for your time and insights, and I invite our listeners to take these ideas in the spirit they were offered to really help constructively build greater relationships among people and maybe enhance our connectedness as a race, as a human race. So you have the final word. I'd love to know what gives you hope and resilience at this moment.
Well, first I want to say, I'm not claiming that anything that I said is true. So that's the spirit, right? Like, think about it. What gives me hope? I actually don't believe in hope. I believe in possibility. And there's so many possibilities. There's still so much possibility. There's people there's so many good people. I would like a study. What percentage of the population are like what I would call good people, like mostly self-led, kind, caring about others? And what percentage are selfish and willing to hurt others for their own gain? And I think we see those people in the news, but I don't think that's the majority of humans. So that gives me hope.
Well, thank you. That gives me hope, and it opens a lot of possibilities for us. Ted Riskin, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tufik.
Thanks for listening. Facing the Moment is an independent production of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, a nonprofit committed to bringing emotional, relational, and societal healing and well-being to a world in need. Learn more at foundationifs.org. You can download this and all other episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until the next episode, may we all keep facing the moment with grit and grace.